We are very honored and happy to see you all here today. To those of you getting to us from Facebook, we're happy to have you here with us too. As we said before on the background, please change your name to your name and where you're from if you're on the call with us. We would like to now start with our gathering. So welcome everyone to a gathering of remembrance in the living room. We are very honored to be a part of this collaboration between Hillel and Tel Aviv University, Beit התפוצות, the Museum of the Jewish People, and the האגודת הסטודנטים for Tel Aviv University. The Jewish people aren't just the people of the book. We are creating new stories every day, and we're all part of this big Jewish story. And today we're here to honor a part of that history that we all share together. And we are very glad to have an opportunity to be a part of this project that crosses borders in Israel and in the world. And today, consecutively with us, we are going to have two other of these sorts of meetings happening. And one of them is going to be with Abraham Roth from Holland, telling his story. And one of them it will be with Aryeh Pinsker, telling his story from Poland. And today we are very honored to be joined by Bracha Rager, who will be telling us her story. Just before we begin, I would like to invite you all to sort of see if we can all get into an atmosphere that's a bit closer to what this day symbolizes. And in keeping with a long-standing Jewish tradition, I would like to invite you all to now light a candle as we listen to a song performed by one of our Hillel at University of Tel Aviv students, Sapir Hubel. Sapir, we welcome you to lead us in a song.
Hi everyone, so as Daria said, my name is Sapir, and the song I'm going to sing is Perach by Yehuda Poliker. You have the words on your screen in English, so you can all join and sing together. שם בעפר ותכלת חלקת שלום ישנה נעמי פרח נעמי ילדה קטנה את החיים לקחו לה חמות השעות מלאכים בחו לה בעיניים יבשות קברו באדמה איך צומח שקט מתוך המהומה Thank you all very much.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Sapir. Before we begin our testimonial, I would like to say that if you have a question during the time that we have the conversation, you're welcome to send the question to me privately on the chat, so that when we come to the question portion of our evening, we can direct the questions to Bracha. Now I would like to forward the conversation to Bracha Rager, who we are very honored to be hearing from today, who will be interviewed by her granddaughter, Maya Zrachia.
Hi, everybody. We will begin in a moment. Safta, can you unmute, please, so we can hear you?
Because the host, no, you have to mute me, the host.
Here, you're unmuted, Safta.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for joining us. We will soon begin our story, or my grandmother's story. But before we begin, we just want to do a little bit of an intro, that today is a day of remembrance, and a lot of the times the stories that we are used to hear are stories that speak about the ghettos, the camps, different horrors of things we know that happened during the Holocaust. And at this time, unfortunately, there are not too many survivors left to tell us the stories of what happened there. And we're beginning to hear stories of second and third generation people sharing the stories of their families. The story we're going to share today, I don't know if we can call it a first generation, a second generation. Safta will introduce herself in a second. I don't think we ever even defined ourselves in a family that has any Holocaust survivors, because the story is so different. And it's important for us to show it and give another angle of things that happened during those years, and what things people went through in that time that are pretty unimaginable in the world we live in now. So I'm going to let my grandmother introduce herself and tell us a little bit about who she is, where was she born, her childhood, and then we will continue the story.
Hi, everybody. The host is spotlighted. Okay. Hello, everybody. For many years, I was born in Israel, and which you'll hear at that time it was Palestine, and I grew up in Tel Aviv. And for many years, I didn't think anything about me and the Holocaust. My parents came to Israel before the Second World War, and then none of our family, my immediate family, was in ghettos. So I think I'm actually third generation, not second, second generation. My story, and at that time we grew up. I was born in 1938, and we actually grew up on the clouds of World War II. And the missing families, we didn't know anything. We had no uncles, no aunts, no family around us, but we only heard about the stories about the Holocaust. But when my mother wanted to tell us the story or the saga of her trip with me to Poland before the war, we used to shut her up and say, don't talk to us about it, we don't want to hear about it. We wanted to grow up as free Israelis in a free land without the traces of the Holocaust. But then so it was, and I hid the whole story. None of my friends knew it. I'm missing a lot of details. But I had 2 cartons full of papers, files, but it was written on top of it, Bracha's roots. When I moved, which was only 10 years ago, when I moved to where I live now, which is in Kfar Saba, I dared to open it, but I wasn't courageous enough to open it by myself. So when my grandson was next to me, I said to him, come Itai, let's open it. And I found 2 folders full of letters, neatly filed and in Hebrew. I started to read the letters, and all of a sudden I saw that this was correspondence between me and between my father and my mother when we were abroad in Poland. And this is how this story started. And then, of course, I became very interested and started to read them and share them with my family. And I'd let Maya continue the background of this particular story. Maya?
Yes. So like you said, when I grew up as a kid, every year during the Holocaust Remembrance Day and all of the different events that happened around it, I have never ever thought we had any sort of connection to it, because I always told everyone that my grandmother was born in Tel Aviv and we're the only original Tel Avivians, and no one can take that away. And then we discovered this story. Little by little, we started to unravel it. And then something happened that finally gave us the option to give it a name. And I'm gonna share the presentation with you so we can all see it. So what happened was that in 2005, Israeli TV host from back then, Meni Pe'er, he had a special for one of the Holocaust Remembrance Day that was aired on TV. And I sort of started hearing the name, I think, after Safta watched it on television, and the story sounded really familiar. He interviewed a bunch of people that were all born in Israel in the 1920s and 30s that were Palestinian citizens, since Palestine back then was still ruled by the British. All of them traveled to Europe during the end of the 1930s for different reasons. Some went on a kibbutz or Jewish agency Zionist mission. Some went to visit family, and all of them happened to be in Europe when the war had started and were trapped wherever they were for the rest of the years of the war. I'm gonna sort of give out the end of the story, but in that special, we also learned that during that time, both the Nazi officials and the British officials had lists of all of the citizens who were out of their place at the time. And it turns out that there were 2,500 Israeli Palestinian citizens that were in Europe at the time. And not all of them had the privilege of coming back to Israel. And this is sort of the story we want to get into. So like Safta said, our story actually goes way, way back. Both her parents, Mulik Berman and Itka Balotsky, grew up in Poland. They were born, both of them, after the Great War, and you can see the pictures of the two families, nice Jewish families, back then in Poland in a village called Baranovich. They all came there from different places, from Russia and different villages in Poland. Both of them grew up in very Zionist environments. They both attended the school called Tarbut at the time, which was the school all over Poland that taught Hebrew and gave people the option to go to the Shomer HaTzair youth movement and to be connected to the Zionist factory and whatever was starting to become in Israel at the time. This family was documenting a lot, so we have so many pictures, all of them telling us the exact date and where they were. So this is a trip of a Shomer HaTzair. Here is both of them. Some more trips, some more family events all over Europe, all documented exactly where they were, and we see all the kids around them and the names. And their biggest dream at the time was making Aliyah. They grew up in a Zionist environment, in Zionist household. They went to a school that taught Hebrew and the Shomer HaTzair youth movement, and their biggest dream was coming to Israel. So in 1933, my great-grandfather, Mulik, decides that he's going to come to Israel, and he starts to make all the arrangements to come to Israel to be a student at the newly opened Hebrew University. And here on the pictures on the right, you can see that he was accepted to university and got his immigration certificate from the British Empire based on being a student. So he came to Israel. He brought his father and grandfather with him. They were able to come almost their whole family together. And by the time they came to Israel, they realized that going to the Hebrew University and studying there is very, very expensive. So he just stayed in the Tel Aviv area and started working for a bank in Tel Aviv. For Itka, for my great-grandmother, the story wasn't that easy. Being a young single woman trying to immigrate to another country on your own was a very difficult task back then. Even though they're already engaged, and here on the left you can see the original engagement announcement from the Jewish newspaper in their hometown. They're already engaged, but it wasn't enough for her to come to Israel. So she needed to be creative and to find another solution. And in 1935, the Maccabi Games were hosted in Tel Aviv. So it turns out that not only her, but I did a little bit of historic research about it, and it turns out that hundreds and hundreds of people, I want to say pretended to be athletes at the time, and came to Israel based on their participants in the Maccabi Games, and just stayed. So even though she had no athletic skills that we know of, and no athletic background, she came to Israel based on the Maccabi Games. She stayed in Israel. Actually, in order to stay, she had to get married, and she initially got married to a local Yemenite man who already had his citizenship in Israel. She got to stay here, and once all of that was done and she got her citizenship, she divorced that man and finally got to marry Mulik and live together in Tel Aviv as they wanted. So Mulik worked at the Anglo-Palestine Bank. Both of them were finally legal in Israel, and they decided to settle around the Petah Tikva area, which was a cheap area for young couples to live in. They rented a room from an old lady over there. He was working, and their life started just as they dreamed of this whole time. One small detail that we discovered in our little historic research is that we think that both of them lied about their ages, because all of the official certificates say one thing about the year they were born, but all of the family stories say they were born after the Great War or after the First World War, so it doesn't really add up. So I kind of feel like they lied about their ages to be seen as more mature and more eligible for their citizenship in Israel. And then in 1938, we get to the very beginning of our story. Mulik and Itka have a little daughter, Bracha. She was born in Petah Tikva on July 17th, 1938. And they documented every moment of Bracha's life. And it's still very well documented until the woman you see standing right here. Safta, do you have anything to add to the story?
this no, go ahead, Maya.
You want to continue? Okay.
No, you go ahead, because this is the album that followed me all my life, and I had, as you said, every step, every smile, every step that I did was documented, and you could get to see the life, the comfort life in Israel at the time. My mother, with my father, and now I had the nurses that took care of me. And then we moved to near Petach Tikva. We moved to Tel Aviv, and this is where I started my life. But after a while, my mother became very, very homesick. And she started to nag my father to let her go and visit her family. She was the youngest of 5. And she had old parents, and she really wanted to go. And one of the things that I could never understand is why my father, who was a very cultural man and knew what's happening around it, why my father let my mother live in 1939, where Europe was started to be on fire. But then we found a letter, and Maya will tell you, they will continue.
Okay. 1 second. So, like Safta just said, historically now, we know that period was pretty crazy, and I'm going deep into the history. I studied history in university just as we discovered all of these letters, so it was important to me to give historic context to whatever we were doing. So looking back at the time, now we know that it was crazy, that everyone in the world knew things are bad, but no one really knew how bad. So in that time, the Jewish Agency was basically who was the government for the Jewish community in Israel under the British rule. Ben-Gurion was the head of the Jewish Agency, and in a quote I found from a letter to Eliezer Kaplan, who was another official in the Jewish Agency, the letter was in Hebrew and we translated it here. So he said in 1939, Ben-Gurion, "The threat of war is real. This news comes from a reliable source. The rumor of this cannot spread around the country, yet we must prepare. It will not be possible to save the Jews of Europe from the terrors of war. That is why our main task is to lay roots in this land." So he knew that danger was coming. He definitely understood that the Jews of Europe were in danger. And the thing that was in front of him the whole time was to lay roots in the land of Israel and to make Israel a safe place for Jews, even though he might not be able to protect everyone he wanted to bring here. And I did a little bit more research, and he never wrote about it publicly. Like we see, he said the rumor cannot spread around the country, that things are really that bad. And not even him, the other side of the political map, Jabotinsky wrote a lot about how he's very worried about the Jews of Germany, but he never imagined that all of the Jews of Europe were in such danger. And maybe the biggest thing that all of them had in common that they really could not imagine, that Poland would fall so quickly under Nazi rule, and especially that the Soviet Union will join forces with the Nazis, at least at the beginning of the war, and help them take over Poland, which was the biggest Jewish population in Europe at the time. So some people knew, it was all over the news, not really how bad war is going to get, but it was definitely not a calm time to go to Europe. And this is a question we struggled with a lot, about how you let your wife and your infant daughter to go on a trip like that, which back then wasn't a plane trip there and back with EasyJet or whatever low-cost company you fly with. It was a trip that was from the get-go going to be months and months and months on what we know is very dangerous grounds. So at some point we found this letter. The original letter is here in the middle of the screen. And we found one passage that really explained how this decision came about. So Mulik, my great-grandfather, wrote in a letter to Itka, which was already in Poland at the time. All of his letters were very organized, so we know exactly the date and where he wrote from. This is on July 16th, 1938, when they left in May 1938. So he writes, "You should know that love is what separated us." He writes this to Bracha, to his baby daughter. "The love of your mother to her parents, who she had not seen in over 4 years. She wanted to go and see them every year since she came here. Even though I knew what awaits me in the days of your trip, unbearable longing and yearning, I agreed that you will go on this trip for the sake of honor thy father and mother." So this was sort of the answer. This gave us the reasoning to why he agreed for them to go. Safta?
Yeah, and off we went. And then we went and we met all the family. And Maya, you have pictures of the family, right?
Yes, I will show it soon.
Yeah, so show the pictures. And the times were difficult. The times were not, my mother didn't even enjoy being there, because from her letters, you can understand that being back with the family, and I was not an easy child, and I had problems with the food, with the whole family. So she didn't, on one hand, she enjoyed being there with and seeing her parents, but on the other hand, she really didn't like it very much, and she actually left to go to another place. But and my father and they wrote each other. The correspondence was very detailed. My mother told everything about how I'm growing up, and my father told her about the situation in Israel, and apparently the situation in Israel was not a very good one. There were always skirmishes with the Arabs, and there were demonstrations against the British, because the British didn't allow people to get in, the Jews to get into Israel. So it was a very, very difficult time. So Maya, you go ahead.
Yeah, so we wanted to give you a little bit of the samples of the letters because everything was documented so beautifully. And like Safta said, when she found the binders with the letters, they were all in chronological order, all bind together. We could trace exactly what happened according to the letters from the moment they left in May 1938 until the end of this whole saga. So just to show you, so this was their passport. In case you were wondering, back then, babies didn't have their own passport. They shared a passport with their mother. So this was the passport picture and the actual passport that we still have.
The Palestinian passport.
A Palestinian British passport, which is very important. And we wanted to show you just a little bit sample of these letters. So here on the right, you can see the letter that Mulik wrote here in Israel. One second. Always with the location, Petach Tikva, always with the date, always signed very, very accurate and in this beautiful Hebrew and this beautiful penmanship, and it's so organized and it was amazing. And then on the other side of the correspondence, you can see the letter on the left. Those are all the letters on this thin paper, written on both sides, half Yiddish, half Hebrew, messy, very emotional, which was her Itka's side back in Poland. And I feel like this sort of reflects how they felt at the time. If she was under a lot of pressure when she was in Poland. She was with her family. She was having a hard time reconnecting and taking care of a baby at the same time. And everything was very, very hard to deal with. And you can sort of see that in her writing over here. And he was just trying to keep things in their regular order and make sure things are happening. And we sort of traced that whole relationship through the letters. So the story keeps on, and in the letters we really hear Mulik's pain when he is in Israel and how much he misses his wife and his baby daughter. And Itka is telling about her hardships back home, and she sends this picture that you can see. It's Itka in the middle, Bracha as a little baby, and both of Itka's parents, back in their house in Baranovich. In the letters, she deals a lot with how she changed, with how the house looks different to her right now, how her family looks different to her after spending 4 years in Israel. Things just all are strange, and you can totally feel that in the letters she writes. This photo was taken in June 1939. During the correspondence, Mulik definitely pressures a lot to know what's going on and when they're coming back. In one of the first letters, we saw that the plan was that she will come back at the end of August, but she keeps saying that she can't cut her trip so short and that she needs to stay and that to spend more time with the family. And they went on a little summer vacation somewhere, and things are just moving along very quickly. And he keeps asking about the political situation. I left the Hebrew on purpose for the letter here because it's written beautifully. And he basically asks, how is the political situation back there? Aren't you sitting on a volcano? Our papers here are full with news about Poland. And I think it's not time of war yet because of what the British official had said. And then a few days later, July 9th, he writes, I've written to you some more about the political situation. The feelings are very tense, and we must hope that in the next couple of months we will have peace. My opinion is that you shouldn't ask for a longer visa, and you should come back home in the date that we planned, which was August. It will give you another 2.5 months. Isn't that enough? And she keeps saying that it's not enough, and you sort of feel the pressure from her family. These are all the pictures of what they did and how the summer looked like back then in Poland, and all of the family and a cousin that's at the same age, and the forest they went to, sort of life continuing about as normal. And then in a letter from July 20th, 1939, Mulik tells us about a big happening in Israel, that the British have stopped Aliyah or closed the gates of Israel for people who want to come. This caused massive protests, and then some conflict between Arabs and Jews. People were killed, people were shot, there were curfewed in the house, and he couldn't leave. And still, the thing he was worried most about is for her to come back to Israel. The last sentence of the letter is highlighted here. There is a boat to Israel on September 23rd. It means you need to leave Baranovich on September 19th. That will be 4 months of your trip. So you have to come back already. He keeps saying that the situation is tense. She has to come back on that boat on September 20th. She keeps saying no. And then on August 27th, he says, you must get back here immediately. The boat is called Har Zion. If you're not coming back on that one, we're gonna find another one, but you have to come back. And then finally, at the end of August, we have a letter, we don't know the date exactly, but she says at the end of August, if it wasn't for the vague political situation, I would keep my visa for a longer time. But now I'm planning to come on the exact date. And that's at the end of August, the last few days. And then, in a heartbeat, the correspondence stops. On September 1st, 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland, and the correspondence of any kind of letters between Europe and Israel and everywhere completely stopped. Mulik loses touch with Itka and with Bracha, and he starts to find any sort of way to get a connection with them because they were supposed to come back home already. So as you know, September 1st was the official beginning of World War II. What happened was that the Soviet army actually invaded the part of Poland in which Itka and Bracha were. If you remember what we said about how the Nazis and the Soviets united forces in order to get that part of Poland. And in a heartbeat, September 1st, everything stops. If they're able to correspond until the end, and at the end of August, she finally agreed to come back home and that this was way, way too much. In September 1st, everything stops. There's no way she's getting home. There's nothing she can do about it. The
Soviets confiscated, and Russia came in, the Soviet confiscated her British passport, her Palestinian passport, so she couldn't get out. Okay. And she kept on going every day to the Russian head of police, which was at that time called NKVD, asking for her passport. And she was turned, they didn't give it to her. This lasted for a whole month until one day the Russian officer said that, no, first he offered her, why do you have to go to Palestine? Why do you have to go to to the desert, to the hot country? I'll send you to my mother to Ukraine, and after the war we'll get married. So my mother was at a bind. What is he going to tell him? So she said, look at the baby. You see, the baby is the flower of the desert. She'll die in the cold. So upon this, he said, I can't see you anymore, and he gave her a passport. Okay, Maya. This
Yes.
the story, how she can get out of it, of Baranovich.
Yes.
And Maya will continue.
So like Safta said, their passport was confiscated. And they really didn't know what to do because without a passport, it didn't matter. You couldn't go anywhere, you couldn't leave. Everything was under curfew. And she kept trying to get her passport back, but in the meanwhile, there was still no connection and she had no idea what's happening in other parts of Europe or what's happening in Israel for that matter. Back in Israel, Mulik decides that he's gonna find them in whatever way possible. And we found letters that he wrote in 5 different languages to everyone he could think of, from the board at the Jewish agency that was dealing with people whose families were stuck in Europe, to the embassies of the British Empire all over Europe, to everyone up the chain of command, including the Queen of England, I think. That saying that because there were British citizens in Palestine, there had to be a way to get them back, because they're not under the rule of the Russians or the Nazis in Europe. They're supposed to be back in Israel under British rule, and he was trying to use those connections. So all of these are examples of letters that he wrote to everyone he could think of that could maybe help. So that started in September, and he kept writing letters for a few months until to everyone he could think of, writing telegrams, and then finally during the end of December, a telegram arrives from Poland to Israel saying 2 words in English, all alive. You can see the original telegram down here, all alive, Ita Berman. From Baranovich. when this telegram arrived, then one problem was solved. He knew that they were still alive, that they were sort of okay back in Poland. Now the other issue to deal with is how to get out of Poland. So she needed to get her passport back, and he needed to find a way for them to get out of Europe at that crazy time. So finally, when she gets her passport back from the Soviet officer, like Safta said, convincing him that her daughter will not survive in the cold and that they have to go back to Israel, she started her journey. In the letters, we see that he tried to send her money, or at least the promise of giving people money for giving them the fare they need for their ride. And on the left, you can see the map of how they made their way. They started in Baranovich, they took a train to Odessa. In Odessa, they tried to find a ship that goes anywhere in the direction of Israel, and then eventually they got to Haifa. But the road wasn't that easy. It was wartime, it was craziness all over Europe, and getting in and out of a train when you're a woman on your own with a baby is really not an easy task. And the one story that was told in my family, even though we always knew we had no connection to whatever was going on in Europe, this story always was circulating around. So Safta, you want to share what happened?
Okay, the trip from Baranovich to Odessa was really very, very difficult because you have movements. People didn't know where to go, where to escape. So some people went to the German part of Poland and some people went to the Soviet part of Poland. And people were going in different directions. It was almost impossible. How my mother made it, I really don't know. But she told us the stories. And one of the story was when she came with me to the Baranovich train station, there were two gentlemen who helped her and allowed her to go part of the trip with them in the first class, which was really nice. But then she had to get off to take a train to Odessa. And she didn't have a ticket and she had to get a ticket. And she was leaving me to go to rush to get the ticket. And I was sitting on the trunk, which had all our things there. And I was a baby, 9 months old. And I was sitting there when my mother got the ticket. When she came back, I wasn't there. So she became hysterical, and some people told her, oh, you're looking for this baby? The nuns took her. What has happened at that time, in such a movement and such chaos, nuns from the different monasteries were gathering neglected children, and a lot of people just left children, and they thought that this is the way they can save them, and they ran away. And they collected, and they said all the children, they took them to this and that room. So this is where my mother found me, luckily, because otherwise, I don't know how it would end up, probably as a nun in a monastery or adopted by some Polish families, which happened to a lot of the children. So this was one adventure that she had to go through. What happened until she got to Odessa, I really don't know. And these are the parts that we're really missing, and we're very sorry that we didn't really want to listen to my mother and get more details, because it's a very, how a woman with a child and the trunk really managed. But she managed. And then we came to Odessa. Maya, tell them how we found, on what boat which boat did we take?
I will. So like you said, you were able to arrive to Odessa on the train, and from there take a boat to Greece, to Piraeus, which was a very central part of Europe back then. And from there, one
What happened? What happened? It froze.
Wait, we're trying to find out. Bracha, I think that only we lost connection with Maya. She will probably contact us soon, but if you want to say in the meanwhile a few words about where the story is continuing.
Yes, we didn't know on what boat she got on, because the boats that my father mentioned, the Har Zion, left in August, and we are talking now about February, and we didn't know the boat, but we finally had a photograph, which Maya has it on her, a photograph that we find that my mother is standing with me next to a boat, and on the other side, the name of the boat was written, so the name was Sveta, and it was a Russian boat that afterwards was used in the war and got bombed. But we managed with this boat to get to Piraeus. In Piraeus, there were boats which were sent by the Jewish Agency to collect all the Palestinian citizens, all the Jews that came to Piraeus, because this was the meeting point that came to Piraeus to take them to Israel. And the most exciting thing is that we found our name in the list of coming. The list of passengers was Aliyah, Olim, new Olim, or coming returnees. And we found our list on the returnees. It was my mother's name. It's all in a square. It's and this is how we found ourselves on the boat that brought us back to Israel. I think that this is it. No, what's happening to Maya?
Thank you. She is trying to reconnect, so she will be with us soon. But we are towards the end in the question part. So maybe Bracha, if you wanna say in a few words, what is your message from the story? What would you want people on this event to have in mind when they have now another piece of the story that probably many of them were not familiar to before meeting and hearing your story?
I think that first of all, I think that we were too judgmental. The Israelis, the Sabras, the Israeli born, were too judgmental on the Jews in the Holocaust. We thought that they are going like sheep to slaughter, and we didn't think that they are very courageous. And we actually found out, and through different stories, the Jews were very courageous, and it was not so easy and they were trying to escape, and there are all sorts of stories. And then the story, my particular story, my private story, is I think it's about my mother. I think that she was a very courageous woman who on one hand, very devoted to her family, but she was she managed exactly, I don't even know the details, but reading of what was the background, how she managed, it's a big question mark. And at that time, I'm very sorry that we didn't get the whole story. And I think that we have to get as many stories as we can from all the survivors that are still with us, and not sort of try to escape from it.
Safta, can I?
Yeah.
So I'm back. And I heard that you shared about how we found the details of the ship.
Right.
And now we can go to the very, very last bit, okay?
Okay.
So let's keep going.
Yes, we discussed as we found our names.
Yes. And the last portion of this story, which actually fits with what you just said about how she was such a courageous woman about doing this on her own at the age of 22. If that's not even the hardest part, is that in 1945, after the war ended and the liberation of the camps happened, Itka discovered through family, friends, and people that arrived back to that her entire family, all of the people you see in these pictures, all of the people who they spent the summer with together, they were all killed in the Baranovich ghetto in 1941 and 1942. We have little shards and bits and pieces of stories of how they died and what exactly happened in the ghetto over there. But basically, she discovered in 1945, after 5 years of being back in Israel and trying to get to a normal life, that she came back to Israel with her daughter, and all the people she left behind are gone. And I can't imagine living with that realization at that part of your life. So to finish up the bigger story is that the documents of the British government and the Nazis showed us that out of the 2,500 Jewish Palestinian citizens that were in Europe at that time, only 500 returned to Israel, and the rest were killed in the ghettos and camps. Every person where there were, with their own stories, and I'm sure it's a lot to take in, but only 500 people got to return, and my grandmother and my great-grandmother are two of the people who were privileged and able to leave just in time. So we wanted to dedicate this evening to the memory of the 2,000 children of Oranges and Sunshine who died in Europe, to the memory of the Berman and Bolotsky family who were killed in the Baranovich ghetto, and to the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. May their memory be a blessing, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you, Maya and Bracha. At this time, I'd like to invite anyone who has a question to write it down to me on the chat. In the meantime, I would love to ask Bracha. In the beginning, you said that one of the things that was problematic about finding the story was that you didn't ask. And you alluded to it now a couple of minutes ago again. Do you think that was a feature of Israeli society then? And what do you think of the way that we remember the Holocaust in Israel today?
Yeah, it was a feature, or I think that it was a feature of the Israeli, not society, it was the feature of the youth. I think that the young people, the Sabras, wanted at one time to dissociate themselves from the diaspora Jews. They were looking, we are in a free country, we want to be, tall, blue eyes like Rabin. Rabin was the prototype of the new Israeli. And from all the stories, you can see the stories of trying to be strong and trying to be sporty, and they wanted and there was always some sort of disrespect to the Jews. Even there was no connection, or very little connection, between the young people that came, that survived from the Holocaust, and the Israeli Sabras. They were always like different, you know. I was born in Israel and you came from Europe. You came. It was, you know, people talked they didn't know the language very well. They didn't have the Israeli accent, and many people suffered from them. And I know one of the kids in my high school who. We only found out a few years ago, that he was actually a survivor. He tried to cover it up as much as he could. And you hear the stories from lots of from people now, that when they came to Israel, they were so shy, and they tried to really hide the fact that they were not born in Israel. And this was a terrible, a terrible feeling. And now we are we feel very bad about it. We also they had different nicknames, which was a terrible thing. But I think that now we are much more tolerant.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite Keren to ask a question.
So I wanted to ask both of you. You both said that, I don't know if most of your lives, but for many years, you didn't know you have a personal connection to the Holocaust. And I wonder if finding out your personal story changed how do you look at Holocaust, how do you look at Zikaron Shoah, like the remembering the Holocaust. Because I feel that in Israel, especially when I worked with teenagers, there is a lot of the time the conversation around what is my personal connection, and if I don't have, and people who don't have personal connections sometimes feel that this is not part of their story. So I wonder how realizing this in a later time made you think or feel about the Holocaust.
It made a tremendous change in my life. And I started to be, you know, we read stories about it, but I started to feel more emotional and personal, and get more into it, get more into the history of that period, read more, and also get involved in the Amuta. There is an Amuta for the second and third generation, and they have give different lectures. And I also went with Maya's mother and father to Baranovich. I really wanted to see this whole thing, how it looked like, and to see the graves and everything. And also we went to Odessa, because I really was very anxious to see where we were, the city, and actually to follow the footsteps of my mother. So I think that there is a major change. I mean, and I also think that Maya can also probably add something from her feelings. That what does she feel? Where is she? Where is Maya?
So I can add that even though I was always interested in history, and some people know me here that I work in Jewish education, and I've been in this field for a long time, but and I always felt like the Holocaust was something that was very meaningful in our lives anyway, because as a Jewish people, we tend to deal with it a lot and talk about it, and it's always sort of in the background in what you do. But specifically when we discovered this connection and this became very real, it sort of changed my perspective on a few things. I keep saying that imagining her as a 22-year-old woman going through all of this in wartime, in moving from place to place and trying to deal with it. When we discovered this, I was about the same age, and imagining myself with a child going through all of that was impossible to imagine. So it just gave me so much more appreciation for all of the stories we hear, all of the people we see, and how really, and how much courage it demanded from the people that were there.
Thank you. We are, well, very privileged today to host three generations from the same family. So Sharon, Maya's mother, would also like to share with us her view on this question.
Hi. Well, first of all, I'd like to say how proud I am of my daughter, fourth generation, and of my mother. And they didn't know that I'd say a few words. I was very close to my grandmother, and I was privileged to hear the stories even before I think my mother heard the stories about being lost. But I think that my grandmother, not only did my mother not want to hear what happened for 60 years, my grandmother, it was very hard for her to talk about it. I think she was very traumatized when she heard that all her family perished. And she was even hospitalized, I believe, for a few months because of hearing it. And I think that the main thing that I kept telling Maya throughout the whole thing, remember how old she was. She started this journey when she was 20. And I don't think that children today, I'm thinking my kids are older now, but when they were that age, I could not, when I was that age, I don't think I could have gone through what they went through. And I think she was very, very brave. We didn't appreciate it. I was very close to her, but I don't think because she didn't talk about it, we don't appreciate it, how brave she was. Another thing that my mother and Maya didn't say, and I think it's very important to know, that she was widowed at a very young age. My grandfather died when he was 41, and she was widowed. So throughout her whole life, she was a very courageous and very brave woman. And I really think that we owe our lives to this incredible person. And I really appreciated Maya, fourth generation, taking the time and studying her and learning about her. And thank you. I thought it was the time.
Thank you very much. At this time, we have two questions from our participants. I invite Dana to share her question first.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Good. My name is Gal. I live with Itai, who is Bracha's grandson. And I actually wanted to ask, what happened to your father's family back in Poland?
Okay, my father's family, some of them were also killed, but it was a small family, and my grandfather and his father managed to come to Israel in 1933 with my father, because my father got 3 certificates to come to make Aliyah because he was a student. And so they came, so they were not in the Holocaust. his sister got killed, and his sister and her daughter got killed. Her husband survived, and he joined the Russian army. And then I found him. He ended up in Sibir, and a few years ago, I was in touch with him, but then he died of old age. And we didn't go into details, but my mother had, she had a much larger family, but I was talking about only about the small, first contact family, the brothers, the sisters, and the cousins.
Thank you. I would now like to pass the opportunity to Dariela to ask a question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Hello. First, I wanted to thank you very much to share, because you share your story. I think it's very meaningful. And then I wanted to ask, what was your mother thinking in the years that she came back to Israel and her family didn't respond to her, like for 4 years, I think so. What was like their thoughts? What was she thinking of?
She was worried like everybody else. She was very worried. They lived, they read all the newspapers, and there was a tremendous, they didn't know where the people are, but it was not just unique to my mother. It was most of the people that lived in Israel at that time who left families in Europe. This was a general worry, and they were meeting, they were talking about it, and they were very, they were helpless. So, and when my mother got the message through some friends that all her family died in the ghetto, she actually lost her speech for a whole month. She didn't talk. But it was all around. We were not unique. My parents were not unique at that. I was actually very unique. That I had a grandfather, because he came to Israel with my father. So I had a grandfather, which also was very uncommon to children of my generation.
Thank you very much. So at this time, I would like to thank Bracha and Maya and Sharon, who joined them, for telling us your family story. It's truly a testament to human perseverance and courage, and it is inspiring to hear it. We would also like to forward a virtual certificate to Bracha for joining us and being our witness. We hope that in better times we can actually bestow you with a printed one. So again, thank you, Professor Bracha Rager, and your Maya Zrachia, who was also in Hillel at IDC. Thank you, Sapir Huber, for the songs that you played and will play at the end of our meeting. Thank you to the staff of Hillel at Tel Aviv University and our partners, the Museum of the Jewish People at the Atfutsos, and the Students Union of Tel Aviv University. I think for me, one of the things that stand out most powerfully about the story that we heard today is that there are so many generations interlocked here. If in the beginning we said that the story of the Jewish people is the story of all of our families and all of us, I would encourage all of us, after what we heard today, after the amazing history that this family uncovered, to go back and see what parts of our own story we can share or try to find. So again, I would like to thank everyone who was part of creating this evening. And before we move to the last kind of artful part of our evening, I would like to say that after the end of the song we will hear now, we will have some time for group discussions in smaller groups to see how we all feel about what we heard today and what we have to say about our own stories. So Sapir, I would like to invite you again to lead us into a song.
So personally, I just want to say thank you again to Professor Bracha for your meaningful story. It was very interesting, so thank you. The song is called יש לי סיכוי להינצל, which in English is I Have a Chance to Survive by Evet Arbanai. יש לי סיכוי להינצל, אני יודע, אני אוכל להתעורר, להתפכח, אני אוכל עוד מספיק.
So we almost didn't have any technical problems. Let's give it like one more minute to see if we can have Sapir back. And if not, Daria will let us know about the discussion in small groups.
Can you hear me? יש לי סיכוי להינצל, אני יודע, אני אוכל להתעורר, להתפכח, אני אוכל עוד לדבר באהבה. על העיר ועל אישה, כבר עכשיו אני פחות כועס. השקט של רגש מתפקע עם השבת בלילה. לידך כל הזמן. תמיד פחדתי להשתגע, שהלב יקבע ויתרוקן, אבל עכשיו כמו שאני חושב, להינצל, אני חושב. Thank you very much.